Hey, good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Gadi Schwartz coming to you from Los Angeles. And here's some of the stories we're watching tonight, starting with a massive gamble from one of the biggest tech companies on Earth.
It lets you capture and relive your memories in 3D with spatial audio. It's magical.
Apple unveiling its Pro headset, the most advanced and most expensive VR headset now on the market. Is it worth the hype? Will it become the next iPhone? Or is this a billion-dollar fad that is already starting to wane? We're going to talk to Jake Ward in just a few minutes about the buzz from Cupertino. Also, exclusive NBC News reporting says the grand jury in Donald Trump's classified documents case is going to meet this week, and that probably explains why Trump's lawyers were spotted meeting with the feds today. But the former president is still expressing his outrage over the possibility of facing federal charges.
Everything I did was right. We have the Presidential Records Act, which I abided by 100%.
And the California Attorney General is looking into if 2 private planes carrying migrants were sent by government officials in Florida.
They've hired virtual systems, the state of Florida has, to identify migrants in Texas, not in Florida, in Texas, and move them to other states.
And tonight we are starting with a conversation that you might think is very stupid or very exciting or very terrifying, but regardless of how we feel, it is something that will be either a failure worth more money than we can imagine or completely reshape the way we interact with technology. So let's just jump straight in here. Today, Apple unveiled its mixed reality headset, this weird ski goggle-looking contraption. And if you're thinking this is an overpriced video game thing that makes people look really dumb, I'm not here to say that you're wrong, but it does look like it's evolving into something that goes beyond that. This is much more than video games now. It is a computer that you wear on your head, and you can kind of go inside of it, and you can use it to either see the world around you like RoboCop, or you can choose to live in your own world. And with that in mind, this is what Apple is hoping could become the next iPhone. Take a listen.
I miss you so much.
Toast.
All right, online, people are already either embracing the cult of Mac or posting things like this is given some major Black Mirror vibes. But before we get into all that, let's just rattle off some of the specs real quick. This thing is going to cost about $3,500. It is controller free, meaning that you can move your fingers and hands around. It scans your iris so you can navigate with your eyes. So your eyeballs are basically a mouse. It lets you do everything your Mac computer can do, plus watch movies as big as you want, see the world around you, see virtual reality. And when you record video, it is immersive, kind of like how you'd think memories would work. So if you capture something, you can revisit that moment in a way humans have not been able to do up until now. Now, obviously, that is a lot to process, so let's bring in NBC's Jake Ward here. Jake in Cupertino, California. First off, Jake, I don't know about you, but to me this thing looks clunky as hell, but Apple has a way of moving culture. I thought the AirPods looked dumb when they first came out. Now I feel like I can't live without them. My wife says, you know, the Apple Watch is for adults who think they're spy kids, and yet I wear this every day. So is this a fad, or is this a glimpse at what could be the next iPhone?
I mean, this is really interesting, right? It definitely sort of, I mean, it fails the date test, right? You're not going to go on a date wearing this thing, which is how people used to talk about it when people were trying to debut, you know, the Google glasses and the rest of them, right? It's like, will someone make out with you while you are wearing this? That answer is no when it comes to this particular piece of technology. That said, right, the point of this, I think, is a first step for Apple into trying to reclaim some of the glory of the past, right? The iPhone launched 1,000 ships. It created whole industries on the back of it. It put social media at our fingertips. And as a result, right, the pressure on someone like Tim Cook to try to come up with something, again, that's going to redefine the company and launch all these new industries, it must be very intense. That said, I agree with you. I don't think it's the kind of thing that I expected today. I expected this sort of whisper aesthetic that we've gotten used to from Apple to be present in this. You know, it has a long cord back to the battery pack, which only lasts 2 hours. You know, it's definitely it's the most primitive form of this we could have seen from Apple today. And that is what a lot of analysts are sort of pointing out may be the first stumbling block to somebody dropping $3,500 on it.
And Jake, it looks like Apple's share price fell a little bit on the sticker shock there. And on top of that, we've also seen sales for VR headsets down like 2% over the industry recently. So, I mean, is this like, does Apple know something that we don't know? Or is this just a big play at what could be the next big industry?
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, right, does Apple know something we don't know, or do they want something we don't want, right? What I think most of these companies, and this includes Meta, which is the market leader here, want is as much access to our lives as possible, right? The money to be made off of having true sort of insight as to how we're doing things, what our habits are, and our habits of mind, right? How we act and behave and feel even is present in all of these sorts of projects. They're trying to create a world in which we're going to live our personal and professional lives inside this technology. And if they can achieve that, they have incredibly profitable opportunities to analyze our data and make money off the insights. But like you say, there's not that kind of interest right now. I mean, you know, Apple sells 200 million iPhones a year. Last year, only 8.8 million headsets were sold at all by anybody. And so, you know, the market, the traction truly is not there yet. But the ambition is enormous, and I think that must be why they're rolling the dice on this today.
On Twitter, there were people that were posting about how this looks like Black Mirror and, oh, this next season of Black Mirror is going to be great with Tim Cook's tweet there. I got to say, that's exactly what I thought when I saw it. It does look very dystopian when you start thinking about how it captures pictures and videos, and yet at the same time, like, I can see myself wanting to capture a memory in its totality and then wanting to go back and revisit that something. It hits on something that is very human. So I got to ask, is that a dangerous place to be, or is that going to be a thing that we should celebrate as we find ourselves with technology that I don't know, a lot of people probably couldn't have imagined 20 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, certainly none of us could have imagined it 20 years ago, right? And if you told me we'd be living in a world in which we were spending money on a microphone surveillance system that you put in your house, the way that people do on the Alexa, or spending money on, you know, $3,500 on, you know, something you could slap onto your face like this that conceivably, you know, detects all sorts of things about your behavior and your habits and your likes and dislikes, right? No way, man, right? We would never sign up for that in the sci-fi movie version of this story. But you're right. I mean, right, the packaging up and the compartmentalizing and the organizing of our memories for us is one of the sort of essential things that technology does for us now. And it's interesting to see it present in everything from this $3,500 headset all the way down to the latest version of iOS that's going to live on the iPhone, in which they have a new app called Journal that's going to pull together all the stuff you did during your day. It's going to be your location on a map, your contacts, the music you listened to, the photos you took. They say they're going to pull all of that together and allow you to sort of journal around it. These are companies that are trying to understand us as best they can, because the better they can understand us, the more money they can make. Whether we want to trade our, you know, memories for that kind of convenience, we don't know yet what that's going to cost us as a society. But it is a really interesting moment to see the technology really being capable of pulling us in almost in our entirety there, Gadi.
We've talked about what companies want, what the technology is showing. I love to talk to you about the existential. Do you think that we are ready for this type of technology as a species?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have to say, my first thought in bumping into this $3,500 object that's supposed to immerse you in these experiences, I immediately turned to my phone, my iPhone, and I began looking at other things that cost less than $3,000 that could be qualified as immersive experiences. It turns out you can fly from San Francisco, where I am, to Cairo round trip for about $1,300. You can do a 10-day Kenyan safari for $1,500, and you can take the world's longest flight from JFK to Singapore on Singapore Airlines for about $1,000. Those are also immersive experiences. And the idea right now, you know, I can't remember, but I think the stat last time I checked was that Americans, about half of Americans, could not put together an extra $500 in an emergency, $400 I think it was. I don't know, you know, like I think about that world and then I think about these ambitions, and that doesn't square for me, I have to say, in some fundamental way, Gadi.
Jake Ward, that is some perspective. Thanks so much, brother. And a string of death investigations in Portland, Oregon has people worried about a serial killer, but police are pushing back on those theories. In the last 4 months, there have been 6 deaths of women in that region, all found dead within 100 miles of each other. All of them were under 40 years old. Police have not determined whether they were all homicide victims, but some police are saying that the deaths are not connected. Marissa Parra is with us on set. So, Marissa, what exactly are Portland police saying right now?
Yeah, so it's important to look at the language here. And remember, too, that there's multiple different agencies that are looking into this. There's 6 different women, and we know of at least 2 different county sheriff's departments, if you will, in addition to Portland Police. So Portland Police came out with a statement saying they don't have any proof that all 6 cases are connected. But remember, there's 6 different cases. That might mean that they don't have proof that all of them are connected. But there's 6 different cases. They're only in charge of 2. And we do know that 2 of those surrounding agencies are working together. They are communicating with each other, sharing evidence to find out if there's a link. And we spoke with a former FBI agent yesterday about what that looks like, because we know that in order to define a serial killer, there has to be a pattern and there has to be some sort of connection. Well, that requires being able to find connections and patterns in these women. One of them remains unidentified, so that's difficult. But then they have to look at the manner of death, and that's something that hasn't at least been publicly announced for anyone except for one victim. They're going to be looking at the weapons that were used. Is there a pattern with that? Is there a pattern with the women, how they look? There's so much that hasn't been released to the public. But again, when we look at the fact that there were 6 different women, you see them on your screen there, killed and they had vanished and were found dead within just a span of 3 months. Certainly alarming to the public, despite Portland Police's statement, because they're saying, if they're saying that, where's the proof to the public to calm fears and anxieties in the area, in the community?
Yeah, such a fine line between calming the fears of a community and giving information to people that desperately want it. Have we heard from the families of the victims?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can imagine how much anxiety the community has. Now imagine being a family member of one of these victims. So we actually sat down with the family of Joanna Speaks. That's the only person that we know of so far that we have a cause of death for. This was ruled as a homicide. She was beaten to death, and it was blunt force trauma to her head and to her neck. And so her family was saying that there's the pain of losing her family member. It was a stepsister that we spoke to. But then in addition to that, the grief and the panic, seeing all of these other victims, wondering what is going on.
Yeah, so much heartbreak for so many families. Marissa Parra, thanks so much. And turning now to a story we have been following very closely. It looks like the grand jury investigating former President Donald Trump and that FBI search of Mar-a-Lago are expected to meet again in Washington this week. Now, prosecutors have been presenting the grand jury with witnesses and evidence in the case for months now. And Trump's lawyers were at the Justice Department today. Here you see them coming out of the headquarters there. Now, this is all in relation to that FBI search of Mar-a-Lago in August of last year, where they found over 11,000 government documents. Let's break it down real fast with NBC's justice reporter, Ryan Riley. Ryan, so we know about this meeting. We know a little bit more about the grand jury timeline here. Does this actually mean that we're going to see something announced soon?
We could. I mean, right, there are a lot of ongoing investigations into Donald Trump, and I think that this is one of the ones that people have been watching very closely because it is the one that has the most precedent associated with it, meaning that there have been people charged with this offense before. I think if you start talking about the January 6th stuff, you get into a little bit of experimental territory, but there are plenty of former government officials that have been charged with improperly using classified documents. There's just abundant precedent for this charge to be brought forward. There's also a lot of evidence suggesting that Donald Trump obstructed the investigation into his mishandling of classified documents. So there does seem to be a runway for this case to move forward here. And we have indications, especially with this high-level meeting between Donald Trump's attorneys and Justice Department officials, suggesting that this case is being brought to fruition, is really at a turning point, and we could hear something critical here within the next days and weeks.
And Ryan, meanwhile, we've seen Trump posting on his Truth Social today. He said, "How can DOJ possibly charge me who did nothing wrong when no other presidents were charged?" He talks about the classified documents found at President Biden's home, Hillary Clinton's emails. So can you just compare those situations to this particular case for us?
Yeah, they're very cooperation that we saw, for example, between Mike Pence, who had a limited number of documents that were found, and he was openly cooperating, as well as with Joe Biden, same sort of situation where there were documents that may have slipped through that he was cooperating with. But where Donald Trump has taken a completely, publicly he's taken a completely different position, which is that all of these were his documents. These 11,000 documents that belong to the government, he's claiming actually belong to him. He had every right to show these classified documents to anyone he wanted. Also just not true. Also maybe claiming that, perhaps he declassified these at the last moment, although there's no evidence of that. So he's just making these sort of grand pronunciations that really have not much relation to reality, and these are much distinct, very distinct cases from what we've seen with former Vice President Mike Pence, as well as with Joe Biden, who cooperated with investigators and really tried to tie up the loose ends that were in these varying situations. It's just a much different situation. Of course, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge, I think, for the Justice Department to make those distinctions to the broader public, because Trump, of course, is going to be equating his handling of these classified documents with how, for example, the Hillary Clinton email investigation, which many would argue led to his presidency in the first place, as well as comparing it to these situations with both Biden and with former Vice President Mike Pence. So it's going to be a little bit of a public relations challenge, but I think, the distinctions between these cases are very clear.
Ryan Riley, thanks so much. And we've got much more to cover this hour. After the break, officials in California are now trying to figure out how private planes full of migrants are getting to Sacramento. That's just ahead, so stay tuned. Hey, welcome back. And here are some of the other headlines we're watching tonight. Former FBI agent Robert Hansen, who became a spy for the Russians back in the 1970s, died today at the age of 79. He was found unresponsive in his jail cell in Colorado, where he was serving 15 consecutive life sentences for betraying his country. The mother of a 6-year-old boy who brought a gun to his Virginia school and shot his teacher was charged today with 2 counts of federal gun crimes. She was indicted by a Newport News grand jury on charges of felony child neglect and a misdemeanor charge. A trial is set for August 15th. And tens of thousands of members of the LGBTQ community made their way to Central Florida this weekend to celebrate Disney's Gay Days. That's a tradition dating back to the early 90s, but it comes as that legal battle between Disney and Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis has been heating up. And in Michigan, the state is now at risk of a drought. Michigan has not seen any significant rain in weeks, and the forecast isn't looking great either. The state is at high risk for wildfires as well, and the governor is now warning people not to set any fires outside. And the Directors Guild and Hollywood's top studios and streamers have struck a tentative deal on a new 3-year labor contract. Now, this new agreement includes higher wages, protections against AI, and it increases streaming residuals, but it does not mean that the writers' strike will be ending anytime soon. Writers have been on strike since May the 2nd. Here's a weird story. Here in California, officials are investigating a private plane full of migrants being dropped off in Sacramento with no warning. And this is the second time something like this has happened. Now, according to flight logs from today, the migrants traveled from El Paso, Texas to Deming, New Mexico before arriving at Sacramento's executive airport. Now, the California Attorney General's office confirmed there were about 20 migrants on board. According to the AG, this appears to be the same company involved in another flight of migrants who were dropped off at a Sacramento church over the weekend. They were reportedly holding documents linking them to the state of Florida. Ron DeSantis' office has not responded to NBC News' request for comment. The mayor of Sacramento spoke to reporters just a few moments ago.
Somebody, and the early evidence points to Florida, and we know where that points, who would use innocent, vulnerable people as political pawns. Is there no shame? It certainly ought to be fully investigated, and whoever is responsible ought to be held accountable for this.
And NBC News correspondent Gadi Venegas joins us now. Gad, so what exactly do we know about these migrants who got sent to California, and do we know who sent them?
Gadi, so the Attorney General's office in California has now confirmed that these migrants, both those that were flown last week on Friday and those that arrived today, had documents in their possession that indicates the state of Florida was involved in their transportation to California. So we know that the flight that arrived on Friday came from New Mexico. This is a group of migrants, 16 migrants from Colombia and Venezuela that had crossed into the U.S. through Texas. They were processed by CBP. And then in El Paso, it is believed that someone spoke to them and convinced them to then go to New Mexico. And in New Mexico, they were then sent on a plane from New Mexico to Sacramento. They were then dropped off outside the office of the Diocese of Sacramento. So the reason why the Attorney General of California has become involved in this is because of the intention of the individuals that transported them. Now, understanding that the state of Florida could be involved, there is an investigation into why they did this and how legal is it to transport a group of individuals the way they did. Now, the Attorney General in California issued a statement indicating state-sanctioned kidnapping is not a public policy choice. It is immoral and also disgusting. So there's that investigation by the state of California, the Department of Justice, because of the way these migrants had been transported. And Gadi, we've been speaking to some of these organizations, nonprofits, that are helping these migrants. They were the first ones to meet them at the Sacramento at the office of the diocese, and they indicate that these migrants had no idea where they were going. And they have court dates to follow their immigration process, right? And some of them have dates to go to court in cities as far as New York. So moving forward, they will need help relocating to the place where it is better for them to be and continue with that process, Gadi.
And Gad, we've seen flights like this happen before. In September, officials in Florida flew 50 mostly Venezuelan immigrants from Texas to Martha's Vineyard without any warning. And that flight ended up costing Florida taxpayers like $1.5 million. What ended up happening with that situation? And do we know how much this trip is costing?
Right, Gadi. So when that happened last year, some of Ron DeSantis' opponents were arguing that the state of Florida had violated a law by using taxpayer money to transport migrants the way they did, right, to Martha's Vineyard, from Texas to Martha's Vineyard. Now, since then, there has been new legislation passed by the Florida state legislature. This year, they passed new legislation in February that allocated millions of dollars precisely so that the state can use the money to transport migrants this way. Now, as of now, they've allocated more than $20 million, the Florida state legislature, that allows state officials, Ron DeSantis, to transport migrants to what they say are blue states with sanctuary laws, which is exactly what we think could have been done here. The state of Florida involved in a transport on a private jet or private plane to the state of California. Gadi.
A bizarre case. Gadi Venegas, thanks so much. And coming up, fighter pilots chase a private plane over Washington, D.C. before it crashes. Flying by, they saw the pilot slumped over at the controls. We've got details on that terrifying encounter. But first, you got to see this. Fire officials think lightning started this fire at a Massachusetts church. Now, this clip from a witness shows the moments the church steeple was toppled in those flames. Almost 100 firefighters were called to that scene, but unfortunately, they were unable to save the 160-year-old building. Thankfully, though, no one was hurt. We'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. Let's get you caught up in 30 seconds. Apple is betting big on some new hardware. It just launched the Apple Vision Pro VR headset. The price tag, $3,500. And officials in California say 2 private planes carrying migrants just arrived in Sacramento, and the city's mayor says the planes were sent there by the Florida government. And former President Trump's attorneys met with DOJ officials today, and this week the grand jury looking into those classified documents are meeting in Washington. And Joran Vandersloot, the main suspect in the disappearance of Natalie Holloway, could be extradited to the U.S. as soon as this week. He's been serving a 28-year sentence in a Peruvian prison for killing a different woman. Now, Vandersloot was one of the last people to be seen with the 18-year-old Holloway back in 2005 when she disappeared while on vacation in Aruba. Sam Brock has been following all of this. So, Sam, real quickly, can you explain the process of getting Vandersloot back to the United States, and what's the latest on that front?
Yeah, so Gadi, this seemed to be a done deal for a couple of reasons. One, the Peruvian government had come out in May and said, okay, we're ready to extradite him. And there's already an agreement that is in existence between the United States and Peru that if there's a suspect that has charges in the other country, they can be for a period of time extradited. So that happened last month. Then over the weekend, Vandersloot was actually moved from one of the most dangerous prisons in the world, according to his attorney, Chayapalca, which is in the southern part of Peru, to a prison just outside of the capital of Lima, he says, so they could then turn him over to Interpol and then American authorities. So people thought, okay, this is going to happen. But hold up a second. We heard from the attorney of Vandersloot earlier today, who says that at the 11th hour, a member of the Dutch embassy came in and met with him in the prison and said, don't do this because they are violating your constitutional rights right now by pursuing this extradition. And they changed his mind. Now, the Dutch embassy would not confirm that or even that they'd even made a visit, Gadi. But the reality is, his attorney says they have now filed paperwork to try to stop this extradition. And Joran Vandersloot refused to sign, according to the attorney, a passport, which would have enabled him to travel to the United States. So all of a sudden, this does potentially appear to be in jeopardy.
If convicted here in the United States, let's say the extradition gets back on track, how many years could he face here in prison?
Up to 40, theoretically, because there's two charges that an Alabama grand jury indicted him on back in 2010, Gadi. One is extortion and one is wire fraud. And those both pertain to what they found to be efforts by Vandersloot to reach out to Natalie Holloway's family and attorneys and offer to provide them with information on where they could find their daughter's remains if he were paid $250,000. His attorney says those charges aren't true. The reality is that he was manipulated, but there does appear to be a version that's documented somewhere, conversations and requests where Vandersloot was asking for money to provide information, and they said the information he did provide after being paid about $25,000 was, quote, worthless. So that is the basis, at least, of that particular charge, which he theoretically was going to the United States to hear in a courtroom.
And yet, after all of this, no matter what happens here, we still have not seen anybody charged with the death of Natalie. Is that correct?
That is a great point. Her body has not been found. There are no murder charges or nothing about her disappearance. This is purely about his behavior, Vandersloot, after the fact, not about how Natalie Holloway died.
Sam Brock, thanks so much.
You got it.
And the mother of Ethan Chapin, one of the 4 Idaho students murdered last year, is opening up about life without her son. In an exclusive interview with the NBC Today show, Stacy Chapin talked about coping with grief and how her family is paying tribute to the son they lost. NBC's Steve Patterson has more.
It's been more than 6 months since the crime that horrified the nation. 4 University of Idaho students found stabbed to death in November. Police finally arresting their suspect, Brian Kohberger, late last year. His trial set for October. The judge entering not guilty pleas for the murders after Kohberger's attorney declined to enter a plea on behalf of her client. Meanwhile, the families of the 4 students finding new ways to honor their loved ones each day. The mother of Ethan Chapin, one of the victims, sharing with Today Show's Savannah Guthrie that she's written a children's book called The Boy Who Wore Blue, each illustration based on a family photo.
It literally just came to me in the middle of the night. It's the best I can do for him.
Ethan was a triplet. His mother says each sibling wore a different signature color, and Ethan's was blue.
I was so struck by something you wrote. It was on social media earlier this year. You said, we spend no time being angry. That would be energy not well spent, and it still wouldn't change the outcome. We have to look ahead.
Yes.
That's your philosophy.
Yes. It doesn't change the outcome. Even, even looking ahead at the, the trial coming up in October now, we choose to not, it does not change the outcome of our family, and it's energy that we need to put into healing our kids. We let the prosecutors do their job, and we do our job in our family.
Do you think you'll come to the trial or attend it?
Nope.
Yeah. Too hard.
it doesn't change the outcome.
The family's energy now focused on piecing a life back together without Ethan. His siblings, Maisie and Hunter, returned to school at the University of Idaho in January.
What would you want the world to know about him?
He was just the greatest kid. Everybody loved him. He was warm, he was inclusive, he was kind.
Ethan's parents also honoring him through a foundation called Ethan Smile, which gives scholarships to local students to attend the University of Idaho. And in another tribute to Ethan, a tattoo on his mother's arm in his handwriting that says, "I love you, Mom." Steve Patterson, NBC News.
And let's bring it back here to the West Coast for just a bit. Over the last few days, we have seen a massive stop at some of the largest ports in the country after union workers walked off the job because of stalled contract negotiations. Now, to put this in perspective, the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles alone, they handle more than 40% of all container traffic from Asia into the United States. And today, the largest terminal at Long Beach is still closed, and there's still no union contract, which means another stoppage could happen again. And joining us now from Long Beach is NBC's Dana Griffin. Dana, this is one of those stories that you see on the news, and then weeks later, you possibly feel those effects. Are things back up and running at all, or is this going to cause some major delays in the supply chains?
Yeah, Gadi, that is the big question. It could take several days, if not weeks, depending on how contract negotiations go, for us to see any real impacts. But you mentioned terminals being closed. Terminal T behind me, this has been closed all day. And we just heard from the executive director of the Port of Long Beach, who says now there are 2 terminals that are closed for the day shift, but they are expected to open up this evening. So we drove by Terminal 6 moments ago. No activity. We saw one truck. Not sure if that trucker is waiting, but this is the concern. This potential gate closures and terminal shutdowns could cause backlogs. And Gadi, it remains to be seen the impacts of this.
Yeah, it is staggering to see how many goods come through those ports. What's the union asking for here, and what's the status of the negotiations?
So they really want higher wages and job opportunities. They made mention of the $500 billion that the shipping industry made during the pandemic, and they say part of that was because of the workers here, some 22,000 that could be impacted from California all the way up to Washington State. They want the higher wages, they want job opportunities, and want to make sure they have job security because, you know, even as we're standing here, part of the terminal that is open is that automated side where it, again, takes away job opportunities for workers. So it'll be interesting to see if they get that and if they come to some sort of conclusion. We know that negotiations continue, but the bigger issue out of all of this is what happens if there are more disruptions. It could have a trickle-down effect for consumers because when you're talking about truckers not picking up loads, that causes cancellations. And even the Harbor Trucker Association put out a statement saying that the longer that there are delays, the more that this is going to reverberate and cause some issues. And one of the industries that could be impacted is the school supply industry, because right now they're making their way across seas and need to be put in warehouses so they can be prepped before going into stores. And if that costs retailers more money, you can best believe that could be passed down, Gadi, to the consumer.
Yeah, ripple effects that should not be underestimated. Dana Griffin, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And in Davenport, Iowa, authorities have recovered 3 bodies from that building that partially collapsed over Memorial Day weekend. Police say the remains of Daniel Preen were found early this morning, 8 days after the collapse. The remains of Ryan Hitchcock were found yesterday, and the remains of Brandon Colvin were found on Saturday. Meanwhile, one person hurt in that collapse is now suing the city, the building's owners, and its contractors. Joining us now is NBC's Maggie Vespa. Maggie, so now that the 3 bodies have been recovered, what's next for the building? I know that a lot of people have been wondering when it's going to be demolished. It seems like such a safety hazard for that entire community.
Yeah, Gadi, it definitely is. I mean, people are very worried about it. You're right. But basically, authorities say that process has weirdly kind of already started. And that was the reason they say they brought in this team, this Iowa State Task Force team, who could start sifting through the rubble, having propped up the part of the building that they were really worried would come down. At the same time, they were taking away parts of the building that basically they say could safely be taken down, again, simultaneously. So it seems like a really precarious operation, but they had kind of already been doing that over the weekend. They say that process will continue. So it doesn't seem like we're going to see like a big, at least from what we're told, sort of wrecking ball moment of this building, at least not quite yet, or at least those plans haven't been made public if they do exist. But at the same time, I mean, you touched on just the big headline of the day that came from a press conference this morning. This is just the tragic outcome that no one wants. No deaths had been confirmed in this collapse all week. We were there all last week, and it was really just that people were missing, and all of their families and friends were holding out hope that Ryan Hitchcock, Brandon Colvin, and Daniel Prian would be found alive. But again, as you said, over the weekend, crews finding all of their remains, recovering them, and then just giving their families that horrific news. Gadi.
So tragic. And what's next for this lawsuit? What is in this lawsuit?
Yeah, so essentially, and I'm going to quote the attorney who's filing this on behalf of that tenant that you talked about, and her name, by the way, Dana Feuerbach. The attorney's saying this could very well be the first of many, and kind of put that, you know, in the news that shocks no one pile. I mean, we've been hearing about this for quite a while. Attorneys were on scene all last week talking to residents about a possible class action lawsuit. This is the first one. Dana was a tenant in that building. She was in the building. She was injured in the collapse. And attorneys basically saying now that they have blame to place on a number of shoulders, including Andrew Wold, the owner of the building, also potentially past owners named in this suit as well, along with the city of Davenport and the construction company, basically the contractor that was doing the work at the time of the collapse. But a lot of that blame being put on the condition of the building and years of red flags, attorneys say, that were essentially missed. One of the quotes from the suit that really stood out to us, it says, the structural damage that caused the collapse had been, quote, worsening for years, accusing Wold, the owner, of failing to issue repeat warnings. And then finally it says, quote, defendants recognized the imminent danger residents faced, yet allowed the building to deteriorate while failing to warn residents that their lives were in danger. So a lot of this is kind of, you know, citing that document dump that we got late last week, those years worth of documents, especially dating back to 2020, showing 145 plus interactions between the city and Andrew Wold, the now owner of that building, who we've reached out to about this lawsuit. No response at that time. But again, the attorney who filed this suit on behalf of that one resident saying this could be the first of several to come down the pipeline. Meanwhile, the city says it's continuing its investigation. The chief of police confirming that today. The city last week, excuse me, saying they are not ruling out the possibility, Gadi, of criminal charges in this case. So this could be a very long road ahead, again, with this tragic benchmark this morning. Gadi.
Maggie Vespa, thanks so much. And still to come, a mom in Australia is free tonight after serving 20 years in prison. We're going to tell you about the new evidence that proved she did not kill her 4 kids. That wild story is coming up next. Hey, thanks for sticking with us. Let's take a quick look at the news making headlines around the world. First, an Australian mom who spent 20 years in prison for the deaths of her 4 children has just been pardoned. New scientific evidence found that each of Kathleen Folbig's kids likely died from a genetic mutation all before the age of 2. Her supporters expect that her conviction will be overturned soon. And officials in India say a signal error led to that train crash that killed nearly 300 people. India's railway minister says that they're looking into who caused that mistake and whether it was intentional. Another railway board member adding, quote, the system is 99.9% error-free. And Canada is gearing up for a really terrible wildfire season. Federal officials say that about 6.7 million acres of land has already burned. In Quebec, specifically, tens of thousands of people have already been evacuated. And CBC News says that firefighters are struggling to control over 150 fires at once. And the Kremlin claims that Kyiv has launched a serious attack in eastern Ukraine, which is currently controlled by Russia. Russia denies those claims, but NBC News has not been able to verify these claims. And experts think that this could be the start of the long-awaited counteroffensive Ukraine has been planning for months in an effort to get back its occupied land. Meanwhile, Prince Harry is back in the news today, and this time he is going to court. He's expected to testify tomorrow in his case against the publishers of Britain's Daily Mirror tabloid newspaper. The Prince, along with others, are accusing the Mirror of obtaining information about them illegally by hacking into their phones. And the tabloid has said it only used documents, public statements, and sources in its reporting. Harry's testimony is about to be historic. He is the first royal in 130 years to appear as a witness in court. NBC News foreign correspondent Megan Fitzgerald has this story.
The morning got off to a rocky start. The judge not happy that Prince Harry was not in court this morning in the event that there was time at the end of the day to call witnesses. Now, his attorney says that he arrived late last night after flying in from Los Angeles after attending his daughter's second birthday, and that he will be in court first thing tomorrow. But I can tell you the anticipation is mounting here ahead of Prince Harry's cross-examination. Prince Harry gearing up for a royal fight in court, becoming the first British royal to testify in a trial in more than a century. The prince is one of several celebrities suing Mirror Group newspapers for unlawful information gathering between 1991 and 2011, including allegations of illegal phone hacking.
Well, this is going to be momentous. I mean, it is a sort of courtroom drama with a royal soap opera thrown into the mix. We're going to see Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, in a courtroom in the High Court, being cross-examined for 2 days.
Harry alleges that press intrusion into his privacy caused huge distress and paranoia, put unnecessary stress and strain on his relationship with a former girlfriend, and presented very real security concerns. Concerns Harry and Meghan say haven't stopped to this day. The couple's spokesperson saying early last month they were pursued by paparazzi in what they called a near-catastrophic car chase through New York City. The NYPD played down the allegations. But it's that type of invasion royal experts say the couple is trying to change.
I've always felt as though this was a fight worth fighting for.
The Mirror Group newspaper pushing back against the allegations. While they have apologized and admitted its journalists obtained information illegally in the past, they deny claims in the lawsuit that suggest the practices were widespread and that senior executives knew it was happening. And look, after that back-to-back bombshell revelations with the Netflix docuseries and Prince Harry's memoir, there are reports now that the couple is ready to maintain a lower profile. But I can tell you, with Prince Harry testifying tomorrow, he will no doubt dominate the headlines. We have been speaking with experts who say, look, the main goal here is to go after Harry's credibility. Back to you.
Megan Fitzgerald, thanks so much. And tonight we are learning more about that sonic boom heard over D.C. yesterday, as well as a mysterious plane crash that followed it. Air Force crews that intercepted the pilot say he appeared to be slumped over in the air, which could explain why no one was able to get in touch with him for nearly 2 hours. Now federal investigators are combing through the crash site in Virginia where that pilot and 3 of his passengers died. Here's NBC's Tom Costello with the latest.
In a remote, thick Virginia forest, investigators are piecing through the decimated remains of that private citation jet that apparently ran out of fuel and crashed as Air Force fighter jets watched, unable to help.
Just prior to the incident, the pilot was slumped over.
Family members tell NBC New York that Adina Azarian, a prominent real estate broker, was on board with her 2-year-old daughter, Aria. Their nanny and the pilot headed for the Hamptons.
We're just devastated. You have to tell people every day that you love them.
It started at 1:13 p.m. Sunday as the plane left Tennessee headed for Long Island, New York. But at 1:28, just 15 minutes later, the veteran pilot stopped responding to air traffic control commands. The plane continued north all the way to Long Island before doing a U-turn and heading back towards Tennessee, still failing to respond to controllers.
Number 611 Victor Golf, contact Washington Center 127.902, acknowledge.
6 Air Force fighter jets were scrambled along the East Coast. As the plane approached restricted D.C. airspace, 2 F-16s were authorized to go supersonic.
They had to break the sound barrier to get up to speed to get to the aircraft in question.
Their twin booms startling residents and pets on the ground as they fired flares, then flew straight at the citation, calling the pilot.
This is an armed air defense fighter.
You have been intercepted.
They quickly saw the pilot was slumped over and unresponsive as his plane continued flying into Virginia, where it crashed, having traveled 300 miles without radio communication. The NTSB is considering whether a sudden loss of cabin air pressure could have incapacitated everyone on board. Just as golf legend Payne Stewart and 5 others were killed in 1999 when their plane lost cabin pressure, then crashed in South Dakota.
You have a matter of seconds to get your oxygen mask on, or you will not be able to breathe. It could be anywhere from a matter of 15 seconds up to a minute to get that mask on. And if you don't, you will indeed pass out.
Tom Costello reporting. Thanks, Tom. And before we go, it is time for the future of everything. We are taking a new look at a new drug that might be a game changer when it comes to treating brain cancer. That's coming up next, so stay tuned. Hey, welcome back. In tonight's Future of Everything, some optimism with what could be a major medical breakthrough when it comes to brain cancer. Now, there's this new drug that's currently in phase 3 of clinical trials that is successfully slowing down the growth of brain tumors. And doctors say nearly half of the patients in the trial haven't needed chemo or radiation since starting that treatment. Here's NBC's Lindsay Reiser with the details.
They're the 3 words no person ever wants to hear. You have cancer. Rachel Guberman had just turned 50.
I went through about a week to 2 weeks of literally in my bed sobbing, just praying that my kids would be old enough for me to see them graduate.
She was diagnosed with oligodendroglioma. Gliomas are the most common form of brain cancer and tend to be slow-growing and incurable.
Almost without fail, people see it as a death sentence.
Treatment of lower-grade brain tumors usually involves surgery, but they can come back and spread, making chemotherapy and radiation therapy the only options. Those treatments typically cause significant cognitive decline. But now, hope. A new drug called vorasidenib in a phase 3 clinical trial has proven effective at preventing the growth of lower-grade brain tumors.
I would call this a game changer.
Dr. Ingo Mellinghoff says this is the first targeted therapy for this type of brain cancer, and nearly half of the patients in the trial still haven't needed chemotherapy and radiation years later.
Did you just want to scream this from the rooftops, like we may have something here?
Yes, they're in their 30s, 40s, early 50s. They're at the height of their professional and personal lives.
Nearly 25,000 people are expected to be diagnosed with a malignant brain or spinal cord tumor in the U.S. this year, with nearly 19,000 deaths projected. The FDA is currently working on approving the treatment for everyone. Rachel learned about the trial a year after surgery and started taking the drug this year.
Here we go.
Yeah, so happy to be there.
It's given her relief and a chance at a normal life.
It doesn't take as much of my brain space anymore, which to me is the definition of hope.
Lindsay Reiser, NBC News, Weehawken, New Jersey.
Lindsay, thank you. Now to a potential insurance crisis here in California. Yet another major insurer, Allstate, is pulling back from the state, saying that the company will not be taking any new applications for property insurance. And that means buying a home here in California is about to get harder and could spell trouble for other states as well. NBC's Marissa Parra has that story.
The state that's seen some of the country's most extreme weather is taking another hit now that Allstate
Are you in good hands?
is leaving new California home buyers in other hands, pausing new home and property insurance in the state altogether. The company citing wildfires, higher costs for repairing homes, and higher reinsurance premiums for the decision they made quietly last year. And just last week, State Farm announced the same move in California for similar reasons.
For those with dreams of buying a home in California, should they be worried?
It absolutely is a reason to be concerned right now.
This year, California has seen all types of extreme weather, from severe drought to catastrophic flooding, sometimes both at the same time. And out of California's top 20 largest wildfires in history, 13 of them happened in the last 10 years.
When you combine all of those, it makes it very difficult to do business, in particular underwrite an insurance policy.
Now, with 2 of the state's top 5 largest property insurers scaling back coverage, brokers on the other side of the table say it's changing the way they do business, asking buyers now to call insurance companies up front.
typically, most buyers don't really reach out for home insurance until a couple of days before the close of escrow.
And it's not just affecting residents in the Golden State. Future homeowners in places like Florida, Texas, Louisiana, all battered by hurricanes in recent years, now in the path of a looming insurance crisis.
These are all very disaster, natural catastrophe prone areas. We definitely see some changing in the cycles.
With severe weather season just heating up, the financial hit unlikely to cool down anytime soon.
And that does it for us tonight. I'm Gadi Schwartz. We'll see you tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.